There's something about a sunny Saturday afternoon, a cold drink in hand, and your favorite playlist drifting through the air that just feels right. That's all I wanted. Nothing wild, nothing rowdy, just some good vibes to go along with mowing the lawn, washing my car, or kicking back on the porch after a long week of work. It wasn't like I was throwing raves or hosting concerts. I was just enjoying my own space. My own yard. My own freedom, or so I thought. It started with a small Bluetooth speaker. You know, one of those compact ones that fits in the palm of your hand but still manages to put out some decent sound. I'd place it on the patio table while I grilled or worked on small home projects. Classic rock, smooth jazz, sometimes even lo-fi beats when I was trying to chill. Nothing over the top. And believe me, the volume wasn't anything that could shake walls or make the neighbors run for cover. It was background music. A soundtrack to my weekend. Over time, a few neighbors would walk by and give me a thumbs up or shout, "Great taste in music!" I even had one guy from down the block ask for the name of a playlist I was using. He said it reminded him of his college days. It felt like it brought people together in this small, subtle way. There was a sense of community that started to form around it, people waving more, stopping to chat, even hanging out a little longer on their walks just to catch the last verse of a song they liked. But in every story where people are happy, there's always someone lurking in the background, arms crossed, lips pursed, just waiting to ruin it. Enter the Homeowners Association. Now, to be fair, the HOA and I hadn't really crossed paths up to that point. I'd heard the usual complaints from other neighbors, some about them being too strict, others about silly rules, but I'd kept my head down. I mowed regularly, my trash bins never sat out longer than they should, and I didn't paint my house neon green. I played by the rules, mostly. So I never expected that playing music, quietly, might I add, would be the thing that set them off. The real irony? My backyard wasn't even facing the main road or another house. It was fenced in, surrounded by a few trees, and partially shaded by a pergola. If there were an award for least likely to disturb the peace, my setup would have won it. Yet somehow, even with all of that, I must have committed the cardinal sin of suburban living, enjoying myself too visibly. One Saturday, I had my speaker playing some Motown hits while I cleaned out the garage. I was singing along to Marvin Gaye, Lost in the Groove, when I noticed someone standing at the edge of my driveway. I looked up, squinting into the sun, and saw a woman I recognized vaguely from one of the HOA meetings I never attended. Clipboard in hand. Frown locked in place. The HOA scout. She didn't say much. Just asked if I could turn it down a bit, and that there had been a couple of concerns. I didn't want trouble, so I nodded, smiled, and turned it down. Way down. So low that even I could barely hear it. I thought that was the end of it. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The next weekend I tried again, this time even lower. I was outside planting flowers with music so faint it may as well have been coming from another zip code. But sure enough, as if summoned by the ghost of silence past, there she was again, this time with a different excuse. "We're trying to maintain a peaceful environment," she said. "Some neighbors find outdoor music intrusive." That's when I realized what was happening. This wasn't about volume. It wasn't about complaints. It was about control. It didn't matter if the music was classical, or calming, or even quiet. To them, it was the principle of it. They didn't want anyone doing anything that wasn't in the sacred rulebook. And even if the rulebook didn't specifically ban music, they were going to find a way to twist something to make it fit. Still, I didn't want to escalate things too soon. So I tried earbuds. I tried using my phone speaker on the absolute lowest setting. I even tried playing it inside the garage with the door mostly closed. But every single time, within minutes, there'd be someone peeking around, giving me that same look like I'd committed some unspeakable offense. I started to feel like I was living in one of those dystopian towns where joy was illegal. Like I needed a permit just to smile. And the more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it became. Since when did music, literal music, become a crime in your own yard? So one Sunday afternoon, as I sat in my silent backyard sipping lukewarm iced tea, I looked around at the empty space, the stillness, the absurdity of it all, and I made a decision. If they thought a tiny Bluetooth speaker was a problem, they had no idea what was coming next. Because I wasn't just going to play music anymore. I was going to make a statement. And it was going to be loud, bold, and beautifully in tune. It came on a Wednesday. Midweek. Random. Tucked inside my mailbox like a snake coiled up and waiting. A plain white envelope with the HOA's return address stamped in bold letters on the front. Nothing handwritten. No friendly note. Just cold, official typography, the kind that practically screams, "We're not mad. We're just extremely, legally disappointed in you." I stood there staring at it for a moment. I already had a bad feeling in my gut, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it on the walk back to my house, flipping through the single sheet of printed paper as my stomach sank with each line. "This letter serves as a formal notice regarding an observed violation of community noise regulations." Noise regulations? I scoffed. What noise? The birds were louder than my playlist. As per Section 8.4 of the Community Standards, residents are expected to maintain peaceful, quiet outdoor environments, particularly during weekends and observed rest periods. Observed rest periods? What was this, a monastery? You are hereby requested to cease the use of any outdoor sound systems that may project music beyond your private property boundaries. Continued noncompliance may result in penalties including, but not limited to, fines and legal action. Legal action? Over a couple of songs on a Saturday? I could feel the heat rise in my face as I stood in the middle of my driveway. I looked around at the neatly manicured lawns, the rows of cookie-cutter homes, the peaceful stillness that apparently had to remain untouched. Somewhere behind one of those windows was the person who complained. Maybe multiple people. Or maybe just the same miserable voice with a speed dial to the HOA board. What got me the most wasn't the letter itself, it was the tone. The way it treated me like some kind of repeat offender, like I was blasting death metal at 3 a.m. every night. I'd done everything to keep the peace. I turned my music down. I used earbuds. I even stopped altogether for a while just to avoid confrontation. And this was my reward? I walked into the house and laid the letter flat on the kitchen table. It just sat there, staring at me like a dare. I paced the room a few times, trying to cool off. Tried to convince myself to ignore it, or maybe draft a polite response asking for clarification. But that voice in my head, the calm one, was being drowned out by another voice. Louder. Angrier. Fed up. I wasn't the villain here. I wasn't the one going around trying to control what other people did on their property. I was minding my business, trying to enjoy a little music and a little peace. And for that I got slapped with a warning and the threat of legal action? Oh, hell no. Later that evening, I decided to reread the community handbook. I dug it out from the back of my file drawer where I'd shoved it years ago when I first moved in, fully intending never to open it again unless something caught fire. It was as dull and bloated as I remembered, page after page of legal jargon and absurdly specific rules. But here's the kicker, nowhere did it specifically ban playing music outdoors during the day. There were vague lines about nuisances and disturbing the peace, but nothing that clearly stated I was in violation of anything. So now I had a new emotion simmering inside me, righteous fury. They were banking on me being too passive to push back. Too polite to fight it. But they underestimated just how deep my petty streak ran. Because when people try to take something small from you, especially something that makes life a little more enjoyable, it suddenly becomes a lot bigger than a speaker and a playlist. It becomes a matter of principle. The next morning, I drafted a response. To whom it may concern. I am in receipt of your letter dated, insert date here, regarding an alleged violation of noise regulations. After reviewing the community handbook in detail, I was unable to locate any provision that specifically bans the use of outdoor speakers or music during daytime hours. I respectfully request that you provide clarification on the basis of this notice, along with any specific bylaw or section I may have violated. In the meantime, please consider this my formal request for documentation of any complaints filed against me, including dates, times, and nature of the alleged disturbances. I look forward to your response. Sincerely, my name. I printed it, signed it, and delivered it directly to the HOA drop box that afternoon. If they were going to come at me with legalese, I could speak that language too. A few days went by. No response. No phone call. No second letter. But what I did get was a visit. It was the same clipboard woman again, this time with a man in tow, someone I didn't recognize, but from the way he talked, I guessed he was on the HOA board too. They approached while I was watering my front lawn. "We just wanted to follow up about the music situation," she began, her voice syrupy and diplomatic. "There have been ongoing concerns, and we're hoping to resolve things peacefully." I gave them the same smile I reserve for telemarketers. "Great. Then I'm sure you won't mind showing me exactly where the handbook says I can't play music in my backyard during the day." The man cleared his throat. "It's more about respecting community expectations." I tilted my head. "So, not a rule, then?" They exchanged glances, and that was all I needed. I let them leave without getting too deep into it, but I knew right then they had no leg to stand on. They were trying to intimidate me, to make me feel like I'd done something wrong when I hadn't. And that's when the idea first started forming in my head. If they were this offended by a Bluetooth speaker, what would they do if I gave them something they'd really never forget? Something bold. Something beautiful. Something orchestral. I didn't expect to become the face of HOA resistance. All I wanted was to enjoy a little music without feeling like I was committing a federal offense. But after that ridiculous warning letter and the HOA's weak attempt to justify it with their community expectations nonsense, something shifted in me. I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every resident who ever got a letter about their trash cans being out 10 minutes too long. About the woman down the block who got fined because her garden gnome was too whimsical. About the guy who got cited for having a shed that was 2 inches taller than regulation. Music wasn't disruptive. They were. Still, I gave them one last chance. I waited a few more days, thinking maybe, just maybe, someone from the board would reach out with a more reasonable tone. A phone call. A meeting. An apology even. But no. Instead, I got another letter. This time it was even more aggressive, citing continued noncompliance, and warning that escalated enforcement actions may be necessary if the behavior persists. They threw in the word disruptive again. Like I was staging riots instead of playing Stevie Wonder on a Saturday afternoon. So I said fine. If you think that was disruptive, buckle up. The plan came to me late one night while I was scrolling social media. I saw a video of a flash mob orchestra performing in the middle of a train station. Brass instruments, string section, timpani, all of it. People stopped in their tracks, mesmerized. There was joy on every face. That's when it hit me. What if I brought that kind of magic right into my yard? What if, instead of a Bluetooth speaker, I went full Beethoven mode and brought in an entire live orchestra? I started doing research immediately. I figured this would be expensive, maybe even a logistical nightmare. But I wasn't backing down. This wasn't about money anymore, it was about the message. And the message was simple. Music is not a crime. After a few calls, a couple of inquiries, and one very amused music director who thought I was joking at first, I found a local ensemble willing to do it. A full, 15-piece orchestra, strings, woodwinds, brass, percussion, the whole deal. Most of them were students or semi-professionals who did gigs for fun or extra cash. When I told them it was to protest a ridiculous HOA rule, they were all in. We settled on a Saturday afternoon, 2 weeks from then. I had enough time to prep my lawn, make space for the musicians, and, just to be extra, rent a few folding chairs for any neighbors who wanted to watch. I didn't tell anyone what was happening. Not even the people I knew would support it. I wanted the surprise. The drama. I wanted the disruption. The morning of the performance, I was buzzing with energy. I cut the grass, trimmed the hedges, and set up a small riser in the middle of the yard made of old pallets and plywood from a friend's shop. It wasn't much, but it would do the job. Then, right at 2 p.m., they arrived. The orchestra pulled up in a couple of vans, chatting and laughing as they unloaded music stands, folding chairs, and instruments in every shape and size. A few of them even wore black concert attire, as if this was Lincoln Center. One guy had a white bow tie. A woman with a cello gave me a wink and said, "Let's make some noise." By the time they were set up and warming up, curious neighbors started peeking through their blinds. A few actually came outside, drawn by the sight of so many musicians gathering on one suburban lawn. The air felt electric. Like we were about to pull off the greatest HOA protest in neighborhood history. Then the conductor raised his baton. And with the first triumphant blast of brass, the performance began. It was glorious. They started with a bold, cinematic piece, something that sounded like the opening of a superhero film. Then they shifted into Gershwin, then a little Mozart, then some dramatic movie scores that made people walking by stop and stare. Even folks who had been skeptical or just nosy at first were soon sitting in the grass, clapping and smiling along. Some kids rode their bikes over and sat on the curb to listen. A few parents brought out lemonade. It turned into an impromptu block party. And me? I sat front row, beaming, as violins soared and the sun shone down on the most peaceful, disruptive afternoon this neighborhood had ever seen. Of course, it didn't take long for the HOA to catch wind. About 20 minutes into the performance, here came the clipboard lady. Same sour face, same fast little walk. She marched right up to me with a look of pure disbelief. What is this?" she snapped, her voice barely audible over the sound of the French horn section mid-crescendo. "A concert," I said, sipping from a tall glass of sweet tea. "Would you like a program? This is outrageous. You can't do this." I gestured to my lawn, my chairs, the audience who were now applauding a particularly impressive oboe solo. "Pretty sure I can. There's no rule against live acoustic music. No amplification. Just art, community, and a little cultural enrichment." She fumed. Literally looked like a tea kettle about to whistle. "This is completely against the spirit of the HOA." I leaned in a little closer, still smiling. "So is threatening people over a Bluetooth speaker." Then I turned back to the performance, leaving her standing there like a confused extra in a musical. She stood for a minute longer, arms stiff at her sides, then stormed off without another word. The orchestra wrapped up after about 45 minutes. They played one final piece, John Williams' Imperial March, which, let's be honest, felt hilariously appropriate, and the whole crowd laughed and clapped. Even some of the more by-the-book neighbors had cracked a smile by then. Music had done exactly what it always does, it brought people together. And it made a statement louder than any HOA letter ever could. I'll be honest, after the last note rang out, after the conductor gave his final bow, and the applause faded into casual conversation and laughter, I thought that would be it. My point had been made. Loudly. Elegantly. With a cello solo and a crowd to back me up. But of course, the HOA doesn't go down that easy. That night, I was still riding the high of the performance. A few neighbors stuck around afterward to chat, and even people I didn't think liked me were surprisingly supportive. One older couple from the next street over said they hadn't heard live music like that since their wedding. Another neighbor, who I'd only ever seen while he angrily hosed down his driveway, actually smiled and said, "That was the coolest thing this neighborhood's ever seen." It felt like a win. A massive, undeniable, cinematic win. Until the email came. I was sitting on the couch with a bowl of popcorn, halfway through rewatching Whiplash, because, mood, when my phone buzzed with a notification from the HOA board. Subject: urgent, HOA response to unauthorized outdoor event. I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly sprained something. It was a long, pompous email filled with phrases like, "egregious misuse of common property visibility, deliberate defiance of community spirit, and my personal favorite, weaponization of music in an otherwise tranquil environment. Weaponization of music. Who writes this stuff? They claimed I had violated the unspoken decorum of the neighborhood and that the event set a concerning precedent. They accused me of encouraging disorderly conduct, even though no one drank, no one yelled, and half the audience were children eating popsicles. Oh, and they ended it with the cherry on top, a $250 fine for unauthorized gathering that disrupted the peace. Now that got me fired up again. First of all, there was nothing in the handbook about needing authorization for guests on my own lawn. It was my property. Not the clubhouse. Not the pool. My lawn. Secondly, if they were going to fine me for throwing a musical event that literally brought the neighborhood together, then it wasn't about rules anymore. It was about power. And I wasn't giving them that. So I decided not to respond right away. I needed a new move. Something that didn't just challenge their bogus fine, but flipped the narrative entirely. They wanted to frame this as me being the disruptor. I needed to show them, and everyone else, that they were the ones out of line. That week, I uploaded a short video compilation of the orchestra's performance. Just some clips I'd taken with my phone and a few others that neighbors had sent me. The music swelled, the sun was shining, kids were clapping. I added a little caption. When your HOA says music is disruptive, so you bring the symphony to the suburbs. I didn't expect it to go viral. But it did. People loved it. The comments came pouring in. This guy is a legend. Petty in the most beautiful way possible. Weaponizing violins is now my life goal. HOAs are the final boss of suburban pettiness. Within 2 days, it had 500,000 views. A few local news blogs picked it up. Then a radio station reached out and asked if I'd do an interview. Then a friend messaged me saying, "Bro, you're on Reddit's front page." I was suddenly that guy. The orchestra on his lawn guy. Which, honestly, was kind of amazing. But of course, fame didn't exactly smooth things over with the HOA. 2 board members showed up at my door the following Saturday with tight smiles and fake concern. "We just want to resolve this peacefully," one of them said, holding another envelope. "Then maybe stop fining me for throwing concerts," I replied, folding my arms. They tried to reason with me. Said I was making the HOA look bad. I shrugged and told them, "I didn't make you look bad. You did that yourselves when you decided music was a threat." They handed me another copy of the fine, just to be official, and reminded me I had 10 days to pay or submit a written appeal. So that's exactly what I did. To whom it may concern. In response to the $250 fine issued for my recent outdoor musical event, I respectfully declined to pay. Nowhere in the HOA handbook is it stated that residents cannot host outdoor events on their own property without pre-approval. There were no violations of noise ordinances, no complaints from law enforcement, and no disruptions reported by any official source. In fact, the only feedback I received from attendees was overwhelmingly positive. If you would like to discuss the matter further, I am happy to meet in person, with or without a string quartet present. Warm regards. My name. I delivered it with a smile and even stapled a copy of my HOA handbook to the back, with the relevant sections highlighted. It felt good. Not because I was being petty, but because I was finally standing up to a system that had gone unchecked for too long. And here's the best part, more neighbors started reaching out. Someone down the street said they were planning a backyard jazz night. Another said they wanted to host a folk duo for their daughter's birthday. People were suddenly excited to use their homes again, not scared of the clipboard crew. The orchestra had done more than make a statement, it had started a movement. And me? I was just getting warmed up. I used to think HOAs were immovable. That once they made up their minds, you either complied or got buried under passive-aggressive fines and rulebooks thicker than the IRS tax code. But turns out, even the mighty HOA board isn't immune to a little public pressure, and a whole lot of music. After the orchestra video went viral, things in the neighborhood started to shift. The same people who used to wave at me with tight, forced smiles now stopped to chat. They asked about the musicians. They asked if I'd do another concert. One guy even offered to bring his grill next time and turn it into a full cookout. The funny part? These weren't just my side of the street. Some were people who had been diehard HOA rule followers, folks who used to measure their lawns with rulers and report porch lights that stayed on past 10 p.m. But now, they were starting to see the bigger picture. The HOA wasn't protecting the neighborhood's quality of life. It was policing personality. And people were tired of it. At the next HOA meeting, yes, I went, front row, popcorn in hand, the room was packed. I had never seen so many residents in one place. Usually these meetings had about 6 people and a guy snoring in the back. But now, standing room only. Word had gotten around that the board planned to formally vote on new noise activity guidelines, including a proposed rule that would ban any musical performance outdoors without board approval. That included live music, amplified music, and hilariously even unstructured musical gatherings. What does that even mean? A drum circle? A toddler with a xylophone? People were not having it. One by one, neighbors started voicing their opinions. And let me tell you, some of them had been waiting years for the mic. There's a difference between community standards and killing joy, one woman said. I'd rather live next to a guy playing jazz on his porch than one of you measuring how long my blinds stay open, said another. A dad in a sports jersey stood up and added, You want to ban music? Fine. But you better ban barking dogs, leaf blowers, and Larry's lawnmower that he insists on revving up at 6 a.m. The room erupted in laughter. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up slow, cleared my throat, and just said, If the biggest threat to this neighborhood is a cello solo, I think we're doing all right. Mic drop. Well, I didn't actually drop the mic. But the vibe was the same. The board looked rattled. They weren't used to pushback. And they definitely weren't used to a united crowd. After a lot of awkward glancing and whispering, the president of the HOA, a man who always looked like he was one email away from snapping, finally stood and said, In light of the community's concerns, we're going to table this vote. That's HOA speak for, we're scared of you now. It wasn't an official win, not yet, but it was a huge moment. And it got even better a week later when the board quietly sent out an email saying they would review the community music guidelines in consultation with homeowners. Translation, they'd been humbled. And honestly, it felt amazing. But I didn't stop there. I started a little movement called Porch Notes. Just a casual group chat of neighbors who wanted to keep the music alive. We started organizing small weekend performances, nothing huge, just little guitar sets, acoustic sing-alongs, even a guy who played sax on his balcony at sunset. And it spread like wildfire. People brought folding chairs, snacks, drinks. Kids danced on the sidewalks. Someone even brought glow sticks one night. It was beautiful. Free. Like the neighborhood had finally exhaled. Even the board began to soften, probably because they realized fighting music was a losing battle. A couple of them even showed up to one of the performances. I saw Clipboard Lady, yes, her, standing at the edge of my lawn one night, hands behind her back, swaying ever so slightly to a blues riff. Did she make eye contact? No. Did she crack a smile? Almost. But I'll take it. Eventually, the HOA replaced the original fine letter with a friendly reminder, and dropped any mention of the $250. No apology, of course, that would be too human, but a silent backpedal is still a win in my book. One afternoon, I came home to find a handwritten note tucked under my doormat. It wasn't signed, but it said, I've lived here 20 years. I thought this place was getting dull. But thanks to you, it's got rhythm again. Keep going. I didn't need a signature. That was enough. Now, every time I hear the faint sound of a guitar, a ukulele, or even a neighbor whistling a tune while walking their dog, I smile. Because I know we changed something. We didn't just push back on the HOA. We reclaimed joy. And look, maybe I didn't set out to start a movement. Maybe all I wanted was to hear a little music on a Saturday without getting a nasty gram in the mail. But the moment they told me it was disruptive, they underestimated me. They underestimated all of us. Turns out, music isn't the problem. It's the solution. And now? Now the HOA is singing a very different tune,